Well, the GPU market is pretty effed up at the moment. No stock of cards that people want to buy, expensive inflated prices when models become available, and plenty of allegations of fake MSRPs. So what on earth is going on? What is causing prices to be so bad? Did GeForce 50 and Radeon RX 9000 series GPUs actually have fake MSRPs? Where do things stand right now? Well, that's what we'll be exploring in this month's GPU pricing update. So a quick recap on the state of play right now. There's been 6 new graphics card releases so far in 2025, 4 from Nvidia, 2 from AMD. Nvidia announced prices ranging from $550 to $2,000 US for their models, but upon release their cards were extremely scarce, often completely unavailable at the MSRP and typically priced at least 20% higher, selling out even at that inflated price. AMD announced 2 models at $550 and $600 US, and while supply was much stronger than Nvidia at launch, availability of MSRP models was limited, and the average price for a premium AIB model was very high. Some retailers have raised prices upon receiving restocks or even during release day to make matters worse for consumers. What I want to discuss is why pricing and availability has been so poor, or at least provide some reasons based on chats with various people in the GPU supply chain. This is a very complex issue with many different aspects to it, but I'll try my best to piece it all together. The first factor affecting the entire GPU market in the lead up to these launches was the premature discontinuation of previous generation models. Basically, both AMD and Nvidia initially had plans to launch their new graphics cards earlier. As of the middle of 2024, the plan was for the GeForce 50 series to launch around November 2024 and RDNA 4 to launch in January 2025. Both launches were pushed back, January for Nvidia, March for AMD. However, by the time these launches were pushed back, the ball was already rolling to clear out inventory of existing stock to prepare for the initial launch timing. In the late parts of 2024, there were reports of GeForce 40 series models being discontinued and selling out around November and December. That was supposed to coincide with the new GPU launches, and similar occurred with AMD. With the launches pushed back, what this did was drain the market of GPU supply. For several months, if you wanted to buy a graphics card at certain price points, especially anything in the mid-range and above, there just wasn't anything to buy. Instead of new models launching immediately to fill that hole, there was a gap of several months where demand built up and couldn't be satisfied with remaining stock or new GPUs. This led to increased demand by the time new graphics cards launched, and a sense of scarcity, increasing FOMO and demand further. Really, this scarcity was artificially created and appears more unfortunate than deliberate. When it comes to the AMD RDNA 4 launch and why pricing was suboptimal to say the least, there is a multitude of factors at play. Our understanding of the situation is as follows. Board partners began producing the RX 9070 XT and RX 9070 in late 2024 for the initial January launch and began selling cards to retailers who stockpile them in warehouses. Both the AIBs buying the GPU dies from AMD and the retailers buying the finished cards from AIBs are paying prices for the respective dies or cards based on an early target price. It isn't as simple as paying the entire price up front. There are various deals and agreements in place, but money is being exchanged with the expectation of a certain price. How the system works is that this early target price is usually at the upper end of the expected price range AMD might announce as the official price. If the price is announced and it's lower than the price AIBs, distributors, and retailers have been working off, AMD then rebates the supply chain. There are many ways this can occur, but the most common is a rebate to the retailers directly, meaning the retailers pay a higher price to stockpile the cards, then AMD refunds the difference so the cards can be sold at the announced MSRP. There are often incentives associated with these rebates. For example, the full rebate may only be given if a certain number or percentage of units are sold, which encourages the retailers to promote and sell the models. At some retailers, this rebate is provided as more of a marketing spend, sometimes called MDF or marketing development funds, but the idea is the same in that the money is intended to enable cards to hit the announced price, or in the case of discounts, hit a discounted price. Another form of rebate is directly to the AIBs. So if AIBs have previously purchased GPU dies from AMD at a higher price, they are rebated, so when they sell the cards to retailers, the models can be then sold at the advertised MSRP without the AIBs losing money on each card. It sounds like AMD generally prefer to rebate the retailers, as that can have marketing benefits that they might not get rebating the AIBs directly. With the RDNA 4 launch, the early target price for the cards was quite high. I don't have an exact number, but retailers we spoke to were expecting in the $700 US range or thereabouts for the 9070 XT based on the prices to acquire cards starting in January. And that's probably why you saw some of those retailer leaks. That means to actually sell the cards at the $600 MSRP, AMD would need to provide about a $100 rebate per card. This is all very normal behind the scenes stuff. Retailers report how many models they have. AMD sends over a lump sum rebate that should be, about that difference in price per card. The main reason we've heard for why RDNA 4 pricing is so variable and why some regions have copped way worse pricing than others is that AMD has allegedly been selective with rebates. Here's an example of how this might work with some theoretical numbers. Let's say you've got a brand offering 3 variants of the 9070 XT, a base card targeting the MSRP, a mid-range model, and a premium OC model. These cards were sold to retailers in January based on an early target price of, let's say, $700. So the base card would be $700, the mid-range model $750, and the premium model at $800. That's a fairly normal 14% premium for the flagship card. Then AMD announced the price is actually $600 US. So to hit the MSRP and have pricing make sense for all models, AMD would need to rebate all cards, providing $100 per model. This would drop the base card to $600, the mid-range to $650, and the premium to $700. And this is ideally how the system works. But if AMD is selective and only rebates the base model, well, under that system, the base card drops to $600, but the mid-range card remains at $750 and the premium card at $800 because those higher models haven't received a rebate and retailers already bought and stockpiled them months ago at a higher price. This is basically what has happened. Instead of rebating all models, we've been told AMD has applied a more limited rebate to cover a select quantity of base models. And at some retailers, this could actually be for a lower quantity of base models than they have stockpiled. OC UK, for example, publicly said that they had thousands of units of RDNA 4 cards, but MSRP is capped quantity of a few hundred. Speaking to retailers, this is likely because of a limited rebate that didn't cover all models. Micro Center in the US, for example, appears to have received a more broad MSRP rebate than European and Australian retailers who have found it much more difficult to hit the MSRP for a wide number of models. This is the main reason you might have seen price increases for base models and other models on launch day. Once the retailer has sold a quantity of cards that matches their AMD rebate, they have to raise the price to avoid selling at a loss. It's also likely why some retailers cancelled orders after they were placed, because they got further clarity around the rebate amount, which is often up in the air before launch, and so then couldn't fulfill the orders at that price. This is something that's frustrated both retailers and AIBs. Retailers are frustrated about the rebate amount and the uncertainty around the level of rebates for each shipment. AIBs are frustrated because they've already made and sold the card to retailers, expecting AMD would rebate the models to an appropriate level. And they can't lower the prices themselves because AMD haven't rebated the AIBs directly for the GPUs they've already bought and used. Now, of course, this is only a partial explanation. In a situation of high demand around launch, there is less of a desire to sell cards at a reasonable price and plenty of incentive to scalp and make money. This can happen at all points in the chain, retailers, distributors, and AIBs, and this will vary depending on the AIBs, the retailers, the region, and so on. So while we've been provided with a reason from multiple sources as to what's happened, it doesn't rule out dirty play. For example, someone raising the price anyway to counter an expected rebate, increasing the price and blaming it on demand, distributors forcing retailers into unfavorable bundles. The list goes on. Just because there was selective rebating at launch doesn't mean that will continue to be the reason for terrible prices. So what about post-launch? Why are prices still bad right now? Well, There's a period of uncertainty at the moment, and it's too early to call the RDNA 4 MSRP fake. That's because of a number of factors. The primary one is that shipments arriving to retailers in the couple of weeks after launch are organized pre-launch under the system I was previously describing, where everyone works off an early target price. It takes time to ship GPUs. With the initial wave of rebates having dried up, when those pre-arranged shipments arrive, retailers will be unable to offer them at the MSRP because they weren't bought at an expected MSRP price. They might be rebated, but there's uncertainty around whether that will happen, so retailers generally aren't offering those cards at the MSRP until they know they're going to be getting a rebate. And this is why right now, if you go to Newegg, you'll see base 9070 XT models like the Power Color Reaper listed at $700 instead of the $600 MSRP. The ASRock Steel Legend at $670, and so on. List prices went up because those are the prices on incoming shipments. The other factor is that AMD announced the price very close to launch, just a week before, and that the price they announced was quite different to the initial expectation, quite a bit lower. You probably would have heard the dubbing over the price sections in AMD's announcement video. AMD was still finalizing the price just days ahead of the reveal and didn't tell AIBs until the last minute. If the price was announced earlier and it was only, say, a $20 to $50 difference to the early target price everyone was working off, it would take less time for that to ripple through to current shipments, and the rebates would be smaller and less impactful. So the difference between the real price and the MSRP would be a lot lower for those times when you're not seeing the rebates. There's uncertainty right now because RDNA 4 could go one of two ways. The good path that we hope is taken is where AMD are already selling GPUs to AIBs at a price that would enable the $600 MSRP to be met. Then, once those are shipped to retailers, they will be available at the MSRP without the need for rebates. In the period between the launch and this rippling through, prices might not be great, but they'd settle down within a month or so. The bad path is where there is little to no effort made to bring the price down. For example, if AMD doesn't sell GPUs to AIBs at a price to enable the MSRP, then continues to rely on rebates and applies those rebates selectively, this will lead to limited MSRP supply. Or, if AIB and retailers are sold GPUs at a lower price, but choose to scalp anyway due to high demand, that would also be bad. And under these situations, it would be safe to call the MSRP fake. Right now though, it could go either way, so I'm not sure it's fair to say the MSRP is fake just yet. People we spoke to in the industry also didn't know whether future shipments would be well priced or not, only that currently arriving shipments would be higher than MSRP. Yes, it sounds like AMD could have done more to enable good GPU pricing across the entirety of the launch and the weeks after, but if pricing returns to the MSRP within a month or two, this wouldn't be much different to other graphics card launches where demand outstrips supply, and so not a fake MSRP, and we'll be keeping a close eye on that. For what it's worth, AMD's official statement claims that MSRP models will be available beyond the launch and suggests that they are working to enable that price. The statement from Frank Azor reads, "It is inaccurate that 549/599 MSRP is launch-only pricing. We expect cards to be available from multiple vendors at 549/599, excluding region-specific tariffs and/or taxes, based on the work we have done with our AIB partners, and more are coming. At the same time, the AIBs have different premium configurations at higher price points, and those will also continue." So whether or not this is true remains to be seen. With Nvidia GeForce GPUs, we're facing a bit of a different situation. Instead of a launch where retailers were stockpiling graphics cards well ahead of the announcement and reveal of official pricing, we almost have the complete opposite occurring. Nvidia revealed the GeForce 50 series well ahead of launch, gave pricing for all their models, and even allowed RTX 5090 reviews a week before its release, but then failed to supply the market with anywhere near enough cards. It's been harder to figure out what's going on here in terms of availability and pricing, but the theme we're hearing from retailers is consistent. Supply is far too low. And this is somewhat contradictory to Nvidia's official statements, where they are claiming supply is actually decent and they've been shipping heaps of cards, just demand is really high. So what is going on there? Our take is that Nvidia's statement is misleading. Nvidia are claiming that in the first few weeks since the launch of the 50 series, Nvidia have shipped twice as many units as in the first few weeks of the 40 series. Except there's a big elephant in the room here: the amount of models released in the first few weeks. Back with the 40 series, Nvidia released the RTX 4090 on October 12, 2022, followed by the RTX 4080 a month later on November 16. It wasn't until January of 2023 that we got the RTX 4070 Ti, nearly 3 months later. However, with the 50 series, Nvidia released 4 models in the space of 5 weeks, with the RTX 5070 launching just 5 weeks after the 5090. The RTX 4070, in contrast, launched 6 months after the 4090. So if you look at the first 4 to 5 weeks, with the 40 series we had just the 4090 and then maybe a week of the 4080. But with the 50 series, we have the 5090, 5080, 5070 Ti and 5070. Nvidia are claiming all 4 of those models combined reach twice the shipments of mostly the 4090. Is that supposed to be impressive? I would have thought when launching 4 models, including popular mid-range cards, that you'd want shipments to drastically outpace a single flagship unit from the previous generation. Retailers, at least here in Australia, have told us that comparing launches, they received fewer 50 series models than 40 series models, particularly when comparing the RTX 5090 to the RTX 4090. The card in the highest supply has been the RTX 5080, with a launch similar to the RTX 4080 Super, but the other models have fallen short of the 40 series launch. Combined, the 50 series numbers may outpace the 4090, but certainly not in a more apples-to-apples comparison in our region. Retailers are also reporting higher demand than they expected, especially for models that weren't reviewed overly positively, so that is also contributing to shortages. Part of this could be what I was discussing earlier, where gamers simply haven't been able to purchase even last-gen models for a few months now in the lead up to these launches, and part of it could be gamers just skipping the 40 series and waiting to upgrade now that the 50 series has arrived. So we're pretty confident supply has been inadequate and in a general sense poor even for a launch without huge demand. The question is, why is that the case? There's a few reasons and theories that we've heard, but it's completely unclear which of them explains the situation best. In all likelihood, it's a combination of factors. There are some silicon supply-side considerations that potentially explain the lack of supply. These include Nvidia prioritizing TSMC 4N wafers for higher margin server and workstation products, and the availability issues with GDDR7 memories, just not as widely available as G6. There have also been rumors of production issues with the RTX 5070, in addition to the missing ROP situation for other models, though we were unable to confirm whether the 5070's launch supply was affected by production issues for real. At the very least, the RTX 5070 Founders Edition from Nvidia won't be available until later this month, which is curious to say the least and certainly points towards there being some sort of production thing going on. For the RTX 5070 Ti in particular, low supply could be explained by its die configuration. It uses the same GB203 die as the RTX 5080 and the same 16GB memory capacity, built on a now mature TSMC node with good yields. The cost to manufacture a 5070 Ti is likely not that different to a 5080, and there won't be a ton of defective dies to use. If Nvidia are waiting for defective silicon to come in, they could be supply constrained and focusing more on the 5080 instead. And we've been told 5080 supply is much stronger than the 5070 Ti. And in addition to that, there would be little incentive to try and sell this model for its $750 MSRP if it costs a similar amount to make as the $1,000 5080. Compounding this fact is that the 5080 is sold out, so if you're going to use the GB203 die for some particular use case, you'd probably be prioritizing the 5080 and just leaving the 5070 Ti to, I don't know, just not be available for a while. On the more shady front, we've heard some rumors of back-channel dealings that are seeing Nvidia GPUs sold directly to exporters, potentially through Singapore to China, aka the Singapore loophole. Recently, 3 men were charged with fraud in Singapore relating to the transfer of Nvidia AI GPUs to China, though that case refers to server-specific hardware rather than gaming GPUs. And of course, this is because Nvidia AI GPUs are export restricted into China, so they're using loopholes to try and get those cards in. However, Blackwell cards like the RTX 5090 are also attractive for AI workloads, and there are whispers 5090 supplies being taken from the gaming market and channeled to AI companies. We're not suggesting Nvidia themselves are doing this, but rather other players in the supply chain. It's one potential explanation for why RTX 5090s have been so ridiculously hard to come by and why prices are inflated to the degree that we're seeing today. The theory, allegedly, is that exporters are willing to pay far more for a 5090 than the list price, which is driving up prices in the gaming market and reducing supply. This wouldn't be a factor in demand for weaker cards though that aren't in demand for AI. These explanations largely relate to supply though, not pricing. We don't have any concrete evidence or explanation as to why, when supply does arrive, pricing is ridiculously high. Our best guess is that this is simply scalping enabled by low supply, with Nvidia doing basically nothing to prevent it. AIB's no supply is low, so they're pricing their custom models well above MSRP. They're prioritizing making custom models, the premium OC versions instead of the MSRP cards, and Nvidia are not doing anything to incentivize the production of those MSRP models. Most resupplies have been those expensive premium cards, especially for the high-tier Blackwell GPUs. Now, I should note here that it is illegal in some countries for Nvidia to force AIBs to sell products that AIBs make at a certain price. Nvidia can control and set the price of their Founders Edition card, but can't demand an AIB makes their card at the MSRP. However, that doesn't mean Nvidia are prevented from encouraging or enabling the MSRP through other means, like restricting GPU quotas if base prices aren't met, selling the GPUs themselves at a price that would actually allow the MSRP to be met with a reasonable margin, or simply producing more Founders Edition cards to anchor pricing. Nvidia don't seem to care all that much about doing that, though of course there is the delicate balance between making tons of FE cards to anchor pricing and annoying AIB partners who do the bulk of graphics card production. And generally, Nvidia has sided on the AIB side. They've tried not to make too many of the FE cards to really hurt the AIBs. What we find most suspicious and unexplainable about this situation is the huge jump in price from the base models to the next tier up of cards. With the RTX 5070 Ti, there are base model listings at $750 US. Whether or not those are actually being produced is another question, but the next step up is $900 for a basic mid-range OC model. The RTX 5080 jumps from $1,000 to $1,200 or even $1,300. The RTX 5090 quickly hits $2,600 and is basically non-existent. None of this is explained through selective rebates like with AMD products, because Nvidia announced the price for these cards before they ship to retailers, so the advertised price should be the price retailers and AIBs are paying for the GPU, and we certainly haven't heard much about Nvidia doing broad rebate systems. Are Nvidia controlling supply to ensure these prices remain high for as long as possible? I mean, not sure. It's certainly one possible explanation to go along with all the others. It might make sense for the high-end 5080 and 5090 with no competition, but the RTX 5070 Ti faces genuine competition from AMD right now, so artificially keeping prices high would make no sense. The one exception to these grossly inflated prices is the RTX 5070, which goes from a $550 base MSRP to $600 as the next step up, for example moving from a Gigabyte Windforce to a Gigabyte Eagle. We're seeing similar in Australia with about a 10% jump to the second tier AIB card over MSRP, though the MSRP in Australia is pretty ridiculous at $1,109 AUD. And this of course says nothing about supply, just the listed prices. At this stage, it's essentially confirmed that the RTX 5080 and RTX 5090 have fake MSRPs. You're just not buying those GPUs at $1,000 or $2,000 US respectively. Cards coming into retailers are largely premium models in limited quantities at inflated prices. For example, in the most recent shipment of RTX 5080s to PC case gear, the cheapest model was the Asus Prime at $2,600 Australian, a cool 29% over the MSRP and the equivalent of $1,500 US. And the other models were even more disgustingly expensive premium stuff. The RTX 5070 Ti is basically at that point now too. This card is just not being supplied and its MSRP is not a thing 3 weeks after launch. The RTX 5070 is a wait and see, though at least right now here in Australia a week after launch, you can pre-order at least one MSRP model with an ETA date of next week, which is more promising than you can say for any of the other 50 series cards. In summary, the GPU market right now is screwed up and there's a multitude of factors at play. Old models being discontinued prematurely, delays to the new generation, poor supply for the 50 series and resulting scalping, rebate issues with Radeon cards, and many other things like AI demand, sneaky exporting, and even tariffs if you live in the United States. It's hard to buy a graphics card at a good price right now, and we'd certainly encourage you to wait for reasonably priced models instead of buying at inflated prices. Will things get better? I'm not sure, but there are reasons it should. There is genuine competition in the market right now, especially for everything up to the upper mid-range, and that should eventually lead to price competition when supply settles. AMD have every incentive to keep flooding the market with RX 9070 XTs to build market share, and in the face of that, it will be hard to maintain high 9070 XT prices, and even harder for Nvidia and their partners to keep the 5070 Ti at $900. If they want to actually compete at that price point, they'll probably have to start firstly supplying the 5070 Ti and then doing so at the MSRP. The high end could be screwed for a while longer with no competition, but for the more recent releases, we're still in the early stages. The alarm bells, though, will be ringing if we check back towards the end of April and prices are still outrageous. As always, we're going to track the GPU market closely and do our best to keep companies accountable in the coming months. Next week, we'll have an updated GPU value comparison looking at cost per frame based on real-world pricing in several regions. This should make it crystal clear which models are the best to buy right now. We've got a couple of ideas on ways to think about real-world pricing, and of course, we'll keep that updated throughout the year as well. But yeah, that does it for the first GPU pricing update of 2025. Just want to get all that information out there in a nice video talking about everything happening with AMD and Nvidia GPUs based on the sources that we've been speaking to in the industry. Lots of interesting information coming through at the moment. So yeah, we'll certainly keep an eye on that and make sure that when shipments are coming in of new GPUs that they're as close to the MSRP as possible, and certainly reporting to you guys what's going to be happening there. So yeah, if you want to support Hardware Unboxed and independent testing and reporting and reviews that we do here right on the channel, please do consider supporting us via Patreon. Links to that is in the description below. If you sign up, you'll gain access to some pretty cool benefits like our Discord community, monthly live streams, BTS content, plenty of good stuff. So thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.